College football nerds, we are here back from our hiatus in the offseason that we take every year, even though we say we won't. We do it anyway. We are talking top 10 coaches, and I think this will be a fun discussion. Josh, we usually do, at the end of every week, our top 10 teams, and it's a kind of a fun back and forth. So we're going to do that with coaches. We've seen a lot of coaching shuffling over the last few years in terms of who's good, who's great. We know kind of those at the top. But I'm going to start out with number one, Josh, and go straight into number two. I think number one is a given for everybody right now. My number one is Nick Saban. Spoiler alert for everybody, Josh's number one is also Nick Saban. Number two for me is Ryan Day. And there was a discussion we had on Twitter earlier this week about Ryan Day versus Lincoln Riley. And I think, like, I was pretty upfront about saying, like, I think it's Ryan Day. You and I both were very high on him taking over for Urban Meyer, and both said it was going to be an upgrade, which was kind of unheard of at the time. But to me, the main thing is he hasn't dropped off. He's actually done better. He got rid of the knucklehead losses that Urban Meyer was kind of known for. He's actually won a playoff game, and he actually he hasn't been blown out. I know he got blown out against Bama in the title game, but he didn't get blown out against Clemson the year before. It was a respectable game versus kind of what Lincoln Riley's done. I still love him. He's in my list, but that was my argument for Ryan Day at number two. Do you have maybe someone different or another argument for him at number two?
I have another argument for him at number two. So I think we took a lot of flack, and I think you're the one that stirred the pot with this, but I think he's just not sexy enough for some people. But, you know, I'll tell you right now, I built my list around one concept. If I was running a program today and I needed a coach to take over today, who would I ask to do it? And I am a huge believer that stability and recruiting are the most important things. How you run a program, how you structure it, what the details are of the program. That's what makes Nick Saban great. I mean, he's not the most exciting, innovative offensive mind on the planet. He's the most detail-oriented, structured guy on the planet. And that's what you want in a head coach. Spoiler alert, someone that's not on either our lists, and I'm just going to go ahead and get this out of the way. What is Ryan Day the exact opposite of in my mind? He's kind of like the exact opposite of Ed Orgeron, right? If I were to ask you today, is Ed Orgeron more likely to win a title or be fired in 3 years? What's your answer?
Be fired. Absolutely.
And Ryan Day, I'm pretty confident that Ryan Day is going to have Ohio State at the top of the pack for a long time. And the recruiting's only gotten better. The results have only gotten better. And he's just going to hire smart people to do good things. I think he's the most underrated coach in the country, and that's saying a lot given the position that he's in.
Number three for me is Brian Kelly, which a lot of people right now in the comments that are watching this are getting ready to make their comment about how ridiculous I am. But and yes, I have been drinking, but I am not drunk. Brian Kelly to me has done so much for a program that could have fallen off, like Tennessee, like USC, like Nebraska, during this time where other programs have risen in this hyper social media recruiting nationally sort of era, and he didn't fall off. And they can't recruit at the same level because of their academic restrictions. Now, I think there is a concern that he could have maybe recruited better. But in general, in terms of program building, stability, as you said, and really being competitive at the highest level, it's been really impressive what he's done. He fields, for his talent, respective talent, he fields more fundamentally sound teams than anybody else, other than maybe Nick Saban. It's been super impressive to me. And the knock is, well, he got blown out by Clemson in the playoffs. He got blown out by Alabama in the playoffs. Well, that Alabama team in 2018 got blown out by Clemson in the playoffs. And Ohio State, who's got number two on our list, got blown out by Alabama right after Alabama blew them out. So, you know, that goes back to more like in any given year, there's one or two really elite teams, and it's not Notre Dame. But Brian Kelly has them right there. Tell me what you got at number three.
I have Dabo Swinney. Again, the top is not super surprising. Dabo has taken a program at Clemson that was not ever at the high echelons of college football and has turned him into that. And I think he's done it by creating a culture that's unique. He has been, I'll say, almost innovative in the modern era in his ability to create a balanced culture that has encouraged his players to be disciplined, to improve themselves, and has also not ground out his coaches. I mean, the biggest thing with like Saban or a lot of the other coaches at the top is when they have good coaches, they can't hang on to them because they're either really ego driven or they just, a lot of it is just frankly the fact that you can't operate in those environments long term. Swinney has found a way to do that. And as long as they're pulling in, number one players at a bunch of different positions, and as long as he can maintain that sort of stability, it's hard for me not to put him towards the top, even though I still have some reservations about how, viable that structure is or will be if they ever have a down year. That won't really matter if they don't have a down year, though. So I have Swinney at number 3.
And I'll give you a little pushback there, even though I have him at number 4. He's had some turnover at the OC spot. It's the defensive coordinator. It's Venables that has stayed, partly because I think he's got, his kid plays there, partly because he may not. Dabo kind of lucked out maybe in finding a guy that didn't have head coach aspirations. And to me, that's a little more luck than anything else. Now, Dabo's not making him so miserable that he wants to leave, but I think the OC semi-revolving door sort of argues a little bit against that. I think it's been as much luck as it has been Dabo, and I also think that defense has been a lot of what's contributed to his success. I'd be interested to see, to me, like, who is Ed Orgeron without, Joe Brady and literally the best defensive coordinator in the game in Dave Aranda. We saw that. So I'll be interested to see who Dabo is. Like, he deserves credit for what he's built, but that's why I have him at number 4 and not number 2. Number 5, I've got Lincoln Riley, who I think that in some ways, and this is just a gut feel for me, in some ways I think he'd be a better NFL head coach than college coach. But I think what he's done at Oklahoma has been very good, not elite, but some of that has been because I think they have some disadvantages in recruiting, and the way that team was set up to be just an offensive juggernaut sort of hurt their defensive recruiting in some aspects. He turned that around a little bit last year. We'll see if that's long term. Oklahoma actually may be my number 1 preseason team when we do our list, so I am high on Lincoln Riley, but I don't know that I would put him above any of these others. Tell me your, I guess, number 4, number 5.
So my number 4, number 5, and this is where I have a lot of people calling me crazy. My number 4 is actually Kirby Smart, and my number 5 is Lincoln Riley. So first, as I said, it's about who I want to take over a program. Kirby Smart, I don't know if it'll come out before or after, but we did a video talking about him historically. 3 straight years winning his division, really kind of unprecedented success in terms of 2 seasons with 0-2 losses, in terms of making major bowls, and consistently a top 3 recruiter. I don't think he gets nearly enough credit, and it's because he lives in a conference that's extremely difficult to win in. It's because he has to deal with Alabama on a regular basis, and then even when Alabama's not up, you get 2019 LSU. I think what he's done has been extremely impressive, and I think he could come into almost any program. He could recruit at a high level, build your program into being something that's a top tier program. And I'd probably rather have the coaches in front of him if I could, but I feel like he could take over most decently good P5 programs and turn it into a power. The reason that I have Riley behind him, I'm with you. I think Riley would be a better NFL coach in a lot of ways than he is a college coach. I think he's a genius offensively, but I don't excuse him nearly as much for the defensive issues as some people do on the basis of talent. I mean, in 2018, Oklahoma wasn't just bad defensively. They were 102nd in the country. The teams they're behind were Kansas and Ohio, like Houston, UTEP, New Mexico State, North Carolina State, Ball State, Air Force. whoever. I mean, not just random P5s, but also a lot of G5s, and G5s weren't even particularly good. So that to me is a little bit inexcusable. It's made up for by the fact that he is clearly a literal genius. I mean, if you've ever seen clips from him, he can memorize plays, or does memorize plays from every game and can recount them years later, just down in distance and time. And offensively, extremely innovative, extremely capable. They recruit well, but it's not elite. And because of all these things, it's just not enough to get them over the hump, and I'm not sure they ever will get there. So I would gladly take Lincoln Riley, but he's not necessarily my preference compared to the other 4 I have in front of him.
So I have Kirby right after that, and we did do a video on Kirby Smart where I praise him a lot, and I am a huge Kirby Smart fan. I think he gets a bad rap for the bad luck of having to coach opposite Nick Saban, that juggernaut at LSU in 2019, and just in general, the SEC in a time where it's a lot stronger than maybe Mark Richt had it. I think Kirby Smart's a great coach. Above all else, in this modern era, he's a great recruiter. My concern is I don't know if he's going to ever field a team with an elite offense. And like you have legitimate concerns with Lincoln Riley, I do think that Riley did some things to at least really get his defense going in the right direction. I don't know structurally what's going on. Maybe it was just that Kirby Smart was too late to adjust his offensive scheme, because it was kind of old man football until last year, where I think that he felt like Newman was going to be the guy, and then it turned out that he wasn't. And maybe that just left him in a bad spot. And this year we're going to see that Georgia offense. But it's been a number of years where it's been the one thing that's really let them down. Like that loss to South Carolina, that overtime loss in the rain or whatever, that was a joke. Like that would never happen with a lot of these other coaches. I just don't think it would. So yeah, I've got Kirby after that. The one thing I will say, going back to Lincoln Riley, that scares me a little bit in terms of these rankings is Lincoln Riley losing to Kansas State and Iowa State. These are inexcusable losses. I think Iowa State was a good, not elite team last year. And it's like, we keep talking about Oklahoma getting over the hump. We had this whole discussion with RJ Young 2 seasons ago about Oklahoma getting over the hump. So that's a little bit of concern for me. The next one I have is Steve Sarkisian. And people are going to think this is ridiculous that I've got a coordinator turn head coach as a top 10 coach in college football. I legitimately think he will be in the playoffs within 3 years. You talk about being fired versus winning a title. I think Sark is more likely to win a title, a national title in the next 3 years than be fired. I love everything about him. I think he got his mental stuff sorted out after leaving USC, where he was a good coach, head coach at Washington and USC. People forget that. I think that he got some chops that he built at Atlanta. And I think he learned a lot of organizational and operational things from Saban, who, if you notice, has become a lot more of a CEO head coach over the last 5 years. And I think there's a lot of things to learn from him now or recently that maybe there weren't. You know, it was more X's and O's 5-10 years ago. Sark's going to be the guy that benefits from the Saban knowledge of program building and all of those structures around that. I think he's going to wreck the Big 12. I've got him at 7 with the potential that he's going to be in the top 3 in a couple of years.
So my 6 and 7 are Brian Kelly and Jimbo Fisher. And this is where things start getting a lot more difficult. And we talked about that when we were prepping this. Brian Kelly, I think he's a very good coach. I think he's somebody that could take over your program and be very successful almost anywhere he goes. His recruiting has always been very good, not necessarily elite. I think it's interesting when you look at him versus Riley, like last season and you know, coming out of 2021, Kelly actually out-recruited Riley. And the interesting thing for me with these 3 coaches, Smart, Riley, and Kelly, is the different approaches they all have. I totally think Smart has an issue on offense. I've heard him have conversations about ball control, and he does really believe in slow pounding defensive football. And I think it's a mistake in the RPO era. Riley is a lot more modern in that regard, but I think Riley disregards a lot of the things that come from slowing down maybe in practice. And I think there are a lot of, when you go full on RPO 100 miles an hour, it seems really consistent that those teams do not develop good defensive habits. 2019 LSU was terrible defensively, even though it had a ton of first-round draft picks. It's just really hard, I think, to practice that kind of football and be good, and so they're kind of out of whack. Kelly isn't as good as either, and their strengths, but he's better than their weaknesses by a large extent. I think if or when Kelly learns to really adopt spread RPO principles and moves beyond the spread offense they've been running, it may require just a better quarterback. I always felt like Book has been holding them back for the past few years. I think Kelly can be a better coach, and I think he's a very good organizer, and I'm with you. He just runs a program really well at a place that they want to win 10 games a year, but winning a national title is a little out of reach. But he's still making the playoffs on a regular clip. And then Jimbo Fisher, one that I think you probably disagree with at some level. Fisher has quietly built Texas A&M into a major power again. He came out with Sumlin with a really sort of messed up roster with a lot of holes. They're recruiting at a top 10 clip on a continual basis. They're getting better offensively. They've been really good defensively in recent years. I think the big question for them is, was Mond a product of Fisher, or was Fisher a product of Mond in terms of their offensive inconsistencies? And he's maybe another guy like Kelly that maybe needs to modernize a little bit. But if you're talking about somebody that can come into a program and build it into a successful program and do all the things you need to do to make the program work, I think he's got everything you need, and I'd be fairly comfortable with him. Again, not as comfortable as I would with anybody in front of him, but this is also quickly getting to the point where I don't feel like any of these are safe bets, and I feel like Fisher is probably the safest bet of the remainder of my list.
Yeah, this is like ranking teams. Like, we always have this problem when we get into like the 6, 7, 8 area of it could be anyone between 6 and 16 could fill that spot, and you wouldn't be, that ridiculous for saying it. My problem with Jimbo Fisher is the thing that you said. I think that Mond was largely a product of Jimbo Fisher and his adherence to certain overly complex offensive approaches. I think that there were times where he could have just used Kellen Mond's ridiculous athleticism to have a huge component of the run game that was intentional with the RPO, with a quarterback run, even a QB power, that he never did. And he relied on these really complex route trees and having Mond could make every throw in the world and he would wow you with one or two of those a game. But Jimbo's offense relied on that. And that scares me a little bit. I like what he's got from the defensive coordinator standpoint. I like what he's fielding as a defense. I'm also not sure how much of his being heralded is because his schedule got a lot easier in 2020 and subsequently in 2021 than it was in 2019, where he had to play 4 top 1 teams. Okay, so next on my list is Dan Mullen, who, to me, I don't think I could put him higher than this because I don't know that I'm ever going to win a national championship with Dan Mullen. And I know Florida fans don't want to hear that, but his recruiting was not great at Mississippi State, and it's not been elite at Florida. And the thought was the brand was holding him back. The brand of Mississippi State wasn't allowing him to recruit on an elite level, and so he was a super X's and O's guy. And once he got to Florida, he would have the X's and O's, and he would pair it with the name brand and recruit on a high level. And I don't think it's really materialized. I love the offense that he put on the field last year. But kind of like we see with Lincoln Riley, that defense was really not great. It was bad. And furthermore, there were some things internally I didn't like his response. In the bowl game, I didn't like that. I felt like he kind of lost the team and they didn't want to play for him, and all these guys started opting out. But I still think he's a really good coach. And I think it's undeniable that he's improved Florida considerably from what he took over. And what he did, people don't realize the job he did at Mississippi State was phenomenal. Starkville's a hard place to win, and he did it. He had Mississippi State ranked number 1, I think, at one point, or really highly ranked. So Mullen's my number 8. Give me yours.
So my number 8 is Steve Sarkisian, and this gets to be where it's a little interesting, right? And if you talk Sarkisian versus Mullen and which one's higher, both of us have Sarkisian higher. And I'll tell you, Mullen didn't actually make my top 10. And it really comes down to what are you looking for? Because I think Mullen is a more consistent guy. If I had a good roster in place and I needed to win for 2 years, I would take Mullen over Sarkisian. But I think Sarkisian is a lot more likely to win a title than Mullen is in the next 5 years at the same school. I think Mullen is a great X's and O's guy. He does not have a great reputation as being an elite recruiter, never has. The recruiting's actually falling off a little bit at Florida. There's a lot of sort of rumors of discord down there. And they've really benefited from the fact that Florida State and Miami have been at all-time lows. And in this current cycle, Florida State and Miami are clawing that back fast. I just think Sarkisian is a guy that will build a program up into something in a way that I don't think Mullen will. I think Mullen is a very good caretaker, and I think Mullen would always do very well at, not to be insulting, but like a second-tier school where he can take that talent and optimize it, but you're never going to out-recruit the elites. You put him in elite, and suddenly it becomes hyper-competitive to stay top 5 in recruiting. Mullen has never been there. He's probably not going to finish top 10 in recruiting this year. And Sarkisian, I think, will quickly have elite recruiting classes at Texas. So that's why I have Sarkisian at 8 and ahead of Mullen. So what's your number 9?
All right, so my number 9 is Tom Allen at Indiana. To me, he's not like a lightning rod kind of coach. He's kind of boring, but in a good way. I think he's the sort of person that's proven that he can extract more out of his program than the star rankings in the recruiting class. He had the foresight to get Ballou and Dr. Ray that are now at Alabama that Nick Saban poached from him. But that kind of thinking, that forward thinking to bring those guys in and look at strength and conditioning from a completely different viewpoint than what the entire sport was doing at the time shows some pretty good smarts in terms of program building and using, like, leveraging advantages that you can leverage as a program that doesn't have the advantages that some of the other ones do. I think if you gave him the resources of an Alabama, he would win like crazy. I think that's who Auburn should have really gone after and thrown a ton of money at to get, because I really like him. I like him at number 9, but I could see him higher up in the future.
Yeah, I don't have him as high just because this was his first year. He's been at Indiana now for 5 years and was his first year with less than 5 losses. And I'm not sure how much of it just was to sort of really due to the COVID situation and the fact that Indiana had a good defense when a lot of teams really didn't. My number 9 is actually Luke Fickell. So somewhat of a similar guy. I mean, I don't think either one of these guys is boring. I mean, Allen is a very energetic character. Fickell is a very intense guy. I'm obviously a defensive guy, but I like what Fickell's been doing in Cincinnati. It's just a matter of time until he gets a shot. And a big thing to me personally is high-level experience at a major program. I think personally, I don't think coaches are ever very successful long-term if they haven't had the ability to go to a major program and be coordinator level under a high-level head coach and learn how to run an organization. That was my big beef when Florida State hired Willie Taggart, as Willie Taggart had 1 year of coordinator experience in his whole career. And then he jumped straight into being a Power 5 head coach. And I don't think he ever really learned how to run the machine that a Power 5 program is. Fickell does actually have that background. He knows how to run a program, and I think he's just getting started. Somebody's going to pick him up, and I think he's going to be a good coach. I will say, this is about at the point in the list where a lot of people are going to say, like, oh, this is ridiculous and you should put X here instead. I don't think anybody at this point is a slam dunk. And I think you can argue with any of these coaches being not particularly successful. And I say that because you mentioned, who Auburn should have hired. They get rid of Gus Malzahn, have a huge buyout, and they get Harsin. And I personally believe it's probably a downgrade, to be blunt, from Harsin to coming from Malzahn. And the reason for that is I'm not super loyal to coaches. I'm not given the paycheck. You can hire them and fire them all you want. But the number of coaches that are proven commodities that you're going to know are going to be successful, you can count them on two hands. There's just not many. And at this point in the list, you start really running out of guys that everybody's going to agree is going to be a success story. And so everybody from about 7 or 8 down, everybody has their flaws and question marks. And, there really are no right solutions, which is kind of scary, right? This is why administrators don't like firing and hiring new head coaches, because there's often not a better option actually on the table.
Yeah, and when we talked about it's tough for Auburn because Malzahn had to go, but they had to fire him because of coach fatigue in a time where there weren't a lot of great options. I think some of the guys on this list actually would have gone to Auburn if they went after him. So it's a little vexing that they ended up with Harsin. Number 10 on my list is Billy Napier, and this is a guy that I don't give some rubber stamp someone as being good because they were a Saban disciple. And I think we've seen enough of those flame out to know that it's not necessarily, you're not knighted into being a good coach just because you coach under Nick Saban. But Napier had some time organizationally under Saban where he learned a lot, I think, on how to run a program. And I just love everything that came out of him last season. And I don't know that there's a whole lot beyond I like him as a coach. I like him as a head coach. I think he could be successful. I think Auburn should have gone after him too. I have him on my list mostly because, one, I like what I've seen so far, and two, I think he has a huge upside. That doesn't necessarily mean like a guy like Franklin that I left off my list who's actually won some things, who's actually won a conference, who's actually, had a team at a high level and beat some really elite teams. He's not on my list because it's kind of like what you said before. If I feel like there's a guy that I know I'd never win a national championship with, it's hard for me to put him on this list. So some of this is based on potential upside that may not be realized, but that's where I got him right now, and that's who I've got at number 10.
And my number 10, really along the same lines as Mario Cristobal. I mean, really weird story, getting kind of run out of Florida, probably way prematurely, goes through Alabama, ends up at Oregon. And he's recruiting up a storm. He seems to be rebuilding the program. The reason he's not higher is there's no consistency. And he's still new enough that, like last year, you can easily chalk that one down to COVID. Prior years, he really didn't have a complete roster. But it feels like he's building it, and I really want to see where he's going because I think he really has a chance to take over the Pac-12. And that's why he's sitting there at 10, but I'm not sure on it. I'm with you. I mean, James Franklin doesn't make my list because I'm not sure how much of him was, how much of him is Saquon Barkley. I mean, how much of him is circumstance. And I don't feel like they're necessarily trending in a great direction. And it's not just a matter of last year either. Matt Campbell is another one that would be on a lot of people's lists. Now, I'll tell you my issue with Matt Campbell. It goes back to the coordinator thing, right? He went from Toledo to Iowa State. He does not have a strong pedigree at a Power 5 program. And where does that usually reflect itself? It's in recruiting, because that's where structure is important, and that's where all the networking connections you get from those major programs tends to come into play. Luke Fickell at Cincinnati has consistently out-recruited Matt Campbell at Iowa State. That's an actual P5 school. I know they're different regions, but still, I would take Fickell over Campbell. And I will tell you 100%. I don't know this for a fact, but I truly believe it. That's why Campbell is still at Iowa State. As much as he likes being there, the big powers are hesitant to hire him because he doesn't recruit at a super high clip, and he doesn't have the experience. So, and I will say that's true of a lot of the people that are left off the list. I just don't know that I would trust him to run a program at an administrative level.
So we've been talking for a long time. We got to wrap it up, but I want to give you one more name that didn't make either of our lists, but I love to pieces. Bill Clark. Tell me what you think about, why he was left off our list, or maybe if we should have considered him.
Bill Clark's an interesting one. He was heavily considered for the Auburn job. He's had a couple really good years with the UAB. I don't want to be a broken record, but it's the same problem. I mean, the guy was a high school coach through 2007, coached South Alabama, then he was Jacksonville State and transferred to UAB. He has minimal experience in major college coaching. And I think there are a lot of times with these guys that lately I think have come up through the ranks too quickly. And I kind of wonder that PJ Fleck is going to be that way. That guy, I've always felt like Fleck is going to be someone that got too close to the sun. The wings are going to melt and he's going to crash, or he's going to row the boat into the ground, whatever. Clark, I think everything indicates that he's going to be a really good coach. But if you put him in the situation of, okay, here's a powerful program, go run it, I don't know that he's going to know what to do. Because once you start dealing with the machinery that is an upper to mid-tier P5 program, it is an entirely different animal. It's why it usually requires a CEO. It's not just like managing boosters. You have to create an entire network for meal plans, for tutoring, an entire staff of people to handle recruiting and analytics, an entire staff of people to do game planning. You've got to be able to network to get good enough coaches and assistant coaches and coordinators. Clark doesn't have any of that. And I think if Clark had been a coordinator at a major school and stepped up, I think he'd be in a better position. But him never going through that, to me personally, I just find that terrifying.
So, and I actually know some people who are friends with Bill Clark, and what they've told me is that he likes UAB. He likes the fact that he kind of rebirthed that program and owns all of their success, and really likes Birmingham and being there. Which they indicated that he's had opportunities for major P5 roles that he's literally just been disinterested in because he likes the setup he's got. I don't know if that's entirely true, but that's what I've heard. I wouldn't be surprised because what he's done at UAB has been really impressive, given how we use UAB as the bad joke in terms of comparing them to Alabama for other arguments that we make. But what he's been able to do has been really impressive. So it's really interesting with this list because, like you say, there are legitimate concerns about big-time football. And a lot of things that you just said are actually things that still concern us about Ed Orgeron in terms of managing a program. So, all right, so wrap it up. Kind of give us an outro here. I'll let you close this one out since I close out everything else that we do. But on your way out, give us one name that wasn't on your list that you think could be in the top 5 within a few years. And then close us out.
To close it out, the one that we didn't name that might end up in the top of a lot of lists in the next few years is going to be Mack Brown, I think. I think he's going to continue to lose puzzling games, but what you saw from him last year was a guy that's building a program that is pretty consistently good top to bottom. He's recruiting elite talent. There's talent there in the Carolinas. He knows how to do it. He knows how to run a program. He has a ton of connections. And if he continues to do that and get North Carolina on the doorstep of being an elite, then I think he's going to make a lot of lists. Now, personally, I don't think he's going to cross the threshold. I think he's still going to lose games that he shouldn't lose, just like he did at Texas. There just seems to be something like that about his program. But I think he's going to enter the conversation of top 10 coaches probably in the next year or two. I honestly think of last year, given what they had and what Clemson had, North Carolina's passing offense might have allowed them to beat a Clemson team that didn't have a great pass defense. I'm not sure where the window will be for him, but that would be my one that probably isn't being talked about as much as he should. But at the end of the day, there's a ton of churn in this field. College coaches come and go. You can never separate the coaches from the programs entirely, and it's just so hard to judge. So, as always, things will be completely different a year from now, and they'll be different 2 years from now, and they're going to be talking about coaches that we haven't even heard of. So, that's it for me. And looking forward to doing more videos with you guys. Hopefully getting into previews pretty soon. Have a great week. God bless.